Welcome to the LowCarb USA podcast, where we seek to inspire you to help us build this community. I'm Doug Reynolds.
And this is Pam Devine. Thank you so much for joining us on the LowCarb USA podcast. We have a very, very special guest with us today, the esteemed Georgia Eid, MD, who we have been fortunate enough to have met many, many years ago. We were just talking about this, how long it's been. I think you spoke for us the very first time in 2017 in Florida, and you just blew our minds away with the information that you so clearly are able to convey to people. And then we were able to bring her along and teach us over very many years. And unfortunately, it's been since 2019 since we've seen you in person. So we're super excited to be able to see you coming up in August. I just very first want to go back to my introduction. Georgia Eid, MD, is a Harvard-trained psychiatrist specializing in nutrition, science, and brain metabolism and mental health. She has more than 2 decades of clinical experience, including many years as a college psychiatrist and nutrition consultant at Smith College and Harvard University Health Services. Her pre-medical experience includes 7 years as a lab research assistant at Joslin Diabetes Center, which is fascinating, and many years in the fields of studying biochemistry, immunology, and metabolism. She brings her extensive knowledge to all of us through her new book, Change Your Diet, Change Your Mind. It is fabulous, and I've learned so much more from you, Georgia, by reading this book. It is in-depth, a deep dive into brain metabolism, so many aspects of our physical health and mental health that I don't think you missed a thing in here. Like, some of it is really, like, you really get a lot of information, and it's very clever at the same time, because Georgia is just super clever, and then she puts words together where it's fun reading at the same time. So welcome, Georgia Eid. And thank you for being
so
here.
Nice. Thank you. That's so nice, Pam. Yeah, Pam, you and I have known each other for a long time, and you and Doug and I, and it really was back in 2017 was the first time I had an opportunity to speak to what was back then LowCarb USA, right? LowCarb USA, and that was in Florida. And one of the reasons I'm excited to reconnect with your conference after a few years away of writing the book and pandemic and all of that is because, there have been some other conferences popping up around the world, but I want people to know, if they haven't been to a low carb conference, that if you could pick one to go to as where you're really going to get this experience of connecting with other people and the speakers. Every conference has a different feel, right? And this particular conference just has this really nice kind of down-to-earth, people-focused feel. It feels like this is science for the people, and this is really, you can connect with speakers there, connect with other people. The dinners are wonderful, and there's a really nice social element to these conferences. And really, Doug and Pam work very hard to create a warm and welcoming environment where everybody feels like they belong. And so this is one of the many things that I admire about their conference, and why I'm coming back after being away for a while. And so it does have that really wonderful feel to it. So I'm excited about going. And the other reason I'm excited about this year in particular is because Doug and Pam have decided to dedicate an entire day, the first day of the conference, which is Thursday, August, tell me the date, 15th. Thank you. August 15th. The entire day is dedicated exclusively to metabolic psychiatry. And the reason for that is because A, the brain matters, and B, there's a lot of exciting research going on in the field of metabolic psychiatry. The field is just exploding. It's really, psychiatry is taking a quantum leap forward, and it's because of metabolic psychiatry. You're going to hear, I'll be speaking there, but you're also going to hear from cutting edge research projects that are going on in college mental health and depression, in eating disorders, in anxiety and depression, more complex psychiatric conditions. You're going to hear from researchers, you're going to hear from clinicians, you're going to hear from about how to build a support network. You're going to hear from people who are doing cutting edge work in the field. And this is really, there's only ever been, to the best of my knowledge, one other conference in the United States that has focused on metabolic psychiatry, and that was on the East Coast last year. So it's never been done on the West Coast, and this mix of speakers is a really fresh lineup of people. Some of these people you'll be hearing from really for the first time, like Dr. Guido Frank, who's doing research at the University of California, San Diego. And you're going to hear also from, it's Dr. Drew Decker. So he's doing cutting edge research with Dr. Jeff Volek at the Ohio State University on depression, ketogenic diets for depression in college students, a topic near and dear to my heart since I was in that field for a long time. I mean, this is really, and Dr. Lori Calabresi, who just published a few weeks ago a case series of 3 patients with complex cases of anxiety and depression who followed a personalized ketogenic diet, and all 3 of them achieved complete remission from their conditions. So you're really going to be hearing directly from the people who do the work at like on that cutting edge. And you'll get to talk to them too, because this is Low Carb San Diego, and so this is how it works there. So it's really friendly and really exciting. So that's one of the many reasons why I'm coming back.
That's so fantastic, Georgia, and thank you so very much for being a part of it. I feel like you're the keynote speaker of the Mental Health Day. You bring such a vast knowledge base to share with everybody, and it's just a great time to be a part of this and to continue the momentum and make sure that people are aware of the research that's going on out there. And like you said, the people who are working with the patients and seeing the most relief of symptoms. There's so much talk in your book and so much talk online through, I know you're working with Brett Scher, who's also been helping us plan this day and put together the people who are doing the work, the research and the clinical work with Metabolic Mind, and just getting more and more and more information out there for people who have been suffering. Because there's the term treatment resistant mental illness. So treatment resistant schizophrenia, treatment resistant bipolar disease, treatment resistant depression and anxiety. And for all of the years that psychiatry has been here and psychology, how many times were you trained to talk about what did you eat? What have you been eating?
Yeah, not once.
You know?
Right. So I'm gonna give a talk that day on the special metabolic psychiatry day on Thursday, the 15th. That talk is, I call it the science of hope, because so many people with mental health conditions of all kinds, whether they're major or minor or anything in between, have lost hope or not been taught to hope, right? They've been told that whatever condition it is that they've been diagnosed with is going to be a lifelong condition. It's going to require, you have to take that you have XYZ, you have bipolar disorder, you have schizophrenia, you have, oh, I'm so sorry, Mr. and Mrs. So-and-so, your son has bipolar disorder with psychotic features, or a very serious suicidal depression. This is a chemical imbalance in the brain. This is going to require medication for the rest of his life. That's what we usually hear in psychiatry. And these medicines are, as anybody who's gone through any kind of psychiatric or mental health care knows, if they've gone through the medication trial and error process of trying to find a medication that works, it's exactly what it is. It is a trial and error process. Still, even in 2024, we don't have any tests that we can offer you in the office to figure out, okay, well, do you actually have this chemical imbalance? And if you do, what's causing it? And if you do, what's the best way to treat it? We have no way to tell what's going on inside your brain and no way to know which medication is the right one to start with, because we've been just guessing for a really long time. And sometimes the medicines can be helpful. I still use medicines, they have their place, but we have not been thinking about root causes. And that's what's so exciting now in metabolic psychiatry is we're looking at the metabolic root causes, the drivers, the underlying forces that are damaging and pulling the brain apart and destabilizing those chemicals. Why is brain chemistry unstable? Why is there a chemical imbalance? And it turns out that if you look at the way we've been taught to eat, not just the junk food, we all know that's bad for us. The junk food will certainly destabilize your brain just in a spectacular fashion. But eat the ways that we have been told are healthy to eat. Even the diet that we've been told is healthy for us, even if you follow that diet, you're still in trouble, because that diet, the sort of dietary guidelines and the, whatever country you live in, most of them follow the United States dietary guidelines for pretty closely, or the Mediterranean diet, or the plant-based diet, or all of these diets we've been told are healthy, they actually aren't. And so if you have tried lots of different special diets for depression or anxiety, whatever it is, you've tried the Mediterranean diet, or you've tried going sugar-free, or you've tried plant-based, or you've tried to follow the guidelines, and you haven't improved, what happens is you start to think, oh, well, diet doesn't matter. Doesn't really matter. So I tried all those things. I didn't really notice much of a difference. So why should I work hard to change my diet if it doesn't make a difference? I'm going to go back to everything in moderation. Why should I go to the trouble of changing my diet if it doesn't work? So the Mediterranean diet helps some people, but it doesn't help most people, and it doesn't help enough people. And it's only been tested in depression. It's never been tested or found to relieve other kinds of mental health conditions the way the ketogenic diet has. And this is why the research on ketogenic diets and psychiatry is exploding right now, because that's where the money is. Now, I don't just mean the financial support, although that is where people who have the resources are choosing to put a lot of their resources, because they can see that this is going to bring results. It's where the money is. The money is in terms of, if you're going to make a change to your diet, you want to see results. You don't, and you can't see results if you're just going to nibble around the edges of your diet by taking a few of the bad things out, which in my opinion is what the Mediterranean diet does. It takes some of the processed foods out and some of the refined carbohydrates, but not all. It's very fuzzy about vegetable oils. It encourages red wine. I mean, there are all kinds of things about the Mediterranean diet that are really risky for the brain. And so, and especially if you have insulin resistance, it's a very high carbohydrate diet that doesn't really pay any attention. The Mediterranean diet doesn't pay really any attention to metabolic health. If you want real change to your mental health, you really want to fundamentally restructure your diet from the ground up in ways that make biological sense. And the Mediterranean diet, even though it is better, it's better than the so-called SAD diet or standard American diet, and even the dietary guidelines. It's better than that, but it's the whole foundation of the diet is a wild guess about what's supposed to be good for us. And it's literally a pattern that people kind of made up. They went over to the Mediterranean and said, oh, these people seem healthier than we are. Let's look at what they're eating. Oh, they seem to be enjoying a glass of red wine with every meal. That's interesting. Maybe that's why. Maybe that's why they're healthier. Let's put a glass of red wine next to our Mediterranean diet food pyramid. that's not just a wild guess, that's also wishful thinking, right? So in any case, I want people to know, and all the other people that are going to be speaking that day too, there's a movement happening in metabolic psychiatry, and some of the smartest and most curious and most productive researchers and clinicians around the world are passionate about this and are going to be talking to everybody who comes to the conference about this, sharing this passion. They're doing this because this is where the quantum leap is happening. This is where the science is really exciting and powerful. So if you're going to change your diet, you want to change your diet in ways that are actually going to make a big difference. So it's not just nibbling around the edges, and it's not just sprinkling some superfoods on top. That doesn't work. There's no such thing as a brain superfood. So what you need is to respect your biology, base your diet on science, not wishful thinking and wild guesses. And it often was going to lead you to a low carbohydrate or ketogenic animal food-based diet. That's where the science leads you. If you follow the science, that's where it will take you. So, I think there's a lot of hope here for people who up until now may have been feeling like they've lost hope. It's a powerful biochemical intervention, ketogenic diet. So anyway, a long way of explaining why I think this day is really important to include in the conference, and why I think it was so great that the two of you decided to emphasize this by giving an entire day to this topic. It deserves it. Its time has come. And you've put together, you and Dr. Brett Scher have put together a really fantastic lineup of speakers.
We're really excited about it, and we're really excited to talk about at the Symposium Metabolic Health of the brain, because the brain, like you like to say, is connected to the body. And I'd like to touch on a couple of things that you said and to go back. So even if somebody was eating a Mediterranean diet, okay, how many countries along the Mediterranean are we talking about? They all eat differently. There's Italy and Spain and all the ones in Northern Africa. They don't all eat the same things. But
Right.
I think a lot of those will probably start with the recommended cereals and oatmeal, right? So what happens to a person's brain and metabolism when they start in the morning eating cereal or oatmeal, Georgia?
Well, there's a case in the book that I share in the book about a physician who shares her glucose readings when she eats different types of oatmeal. So even if you're eating steel cut oatmeal, whole grain oatmeal, not even just the instant oatmeal, which we know is the most refined version of oatmeal, her blood sugar shoots up into the danger zone when she eats oatmeal. And until she used that glucose meter to show that to herself, she didn't know. I mean, she honestly thought, like most of us have been taught, that oatmeal is a brain healthy start to your day. It's going to be when you ask people, what does a brain healthy breakfast look like? They will often say something like oatmeal with blueberries, right? And so there's a lot of people out there who are eating that for breakfast, thinking that that is going to be best for their brain. They're honestly trying to do what they've been told is healthy for the brain. They might even want to eat something else. They might want to have eggs or bacon or sausage, and they might think, well, that's not good for me because there's too much cholesterol, there's too much saturated fat, animal proteins aren't good for you. I need to base my diet on grains and fruit, and the brain needs sugar for energy. I need to start my day off with carbohydrates because the brain needs glucose. Whole grains are really, really important. They're a foundation of a healthy diet. All of these myths, there's no science or logic or biology behind any of those things that we've been told for so many generations is good for us. It's all upside down and backwards. There are three ways to protect your brain. three ways to eat a brain healthy. The brain healthy diet needs to do three things. It needs to nourish the brain with all essential nutrients. Brains are extraordinarily poor in nutrients, so poor in nutrients that most grain products that we buy, things like flours and breads and cereals, are fortified. Because if you don't fortify them and you look at the label, you're going to be very disappointed to find out how poor in nutrition they are. So most of them are fortified. And then, so nourish with all essential nutrients. Grains are not going to help you do that. Protect the brain from damaging ingredients. These are primarily the refined carbohydrates and the vegetable oils. Unless you're eating whole grain oats, you are eating a refined carbohydrate that's going to spike your blood sugar. And then the third principle is energize. Nourish, protect, energize. Energize the brain by keeping those glucose and insulin levels in a healthy range. So, and oatmeal doesn't do that either, because you can see in the book from what happens, and this happens to lots and lots of people, they start their day off with a grain-based breakfast, bagels or oatmeal or cereal, granola, muffins, toast, even whole grain toast. These will set your blood sugar on a roller coaster for many hours afterward. So a brain healthy breakfast is a savory breakfast that includes, ideally, if you're willing to do this, a source of animal protein and animal fat, and plant foods that aren't going to spike your blood sugar, if you choose to include plant foods in your breakfast as well. So it's really the opposite of what we have been told. And that change alone, just simply by starting by changing your breakfast over, can make a big difference. It's a great place to start, because that's usually the sugariest meal of the day.
I know I had a lot of trouble with doing the exact same things you're talking about, and I would add a little bit of nuts because I thought that was a protein source. And literally, Georgia, and I've said this a few times on the podcast when we're talking about this, I would be shaking and jittery and hangry and have a headache and be like almost in a panic mode about 3 hours after eating that, and my skinny mocha coffee, because it didn't have any, it had skinny milk in it, but it was loaded with sugar. And I had no idea why this was happening at 10 o'clock in the morning. I would say to Doug, I have to go across the street and get some hard-boiled eggs. And he would look at me and say, what? My brain was dying for that source of fat and protein that I hadn't gotten. So my body was actually telling me what I needed, which was fascinating to me, because I was like, I need some of that, those amino acid building blocks from the eggs, which we should touch upon that nutrient profile. And then reducing my blood sugar. It was just making me panic and feel terrible. So there must be a lot of people listening to this who feel the same, and we always want to highlight that. But when you're recommending eggs and ham and bacon, and I mean, you can eat dinner leftovers for breakfast if you wanted to. You could eat roast, you could eat pork chops, you could eat fish, or you can go with, some of the things that are on a breakfast buffet, like salmon, smoked salmon and cream cheese, and just don't put it on a bagel. That's a beautiful breakfast that fuels. But that's because it has really good amino acid profiles, and fats are going to, when you talk about nutrients and energizing your brain?
Yeah, so the brain needs nutrients. I mean, really all food is, the reason we eat in the first place, is parts and energy. So we need the right parts to build cells, including the brain cells. And we need to fuel those cells in a sustainable, smooth, reliable fashion in ways that aren't going to damage the brain over time and shrink it and constrict its energy supply. So nourishing the brain with the parts it needs, the nutrients, the micronutrients, things like vitamins and minerals, and also amino acids. This is a really important point. Amino acids are really critical. These are also essential nutrients. You need fats, you need amino acids, you need vitamins, you need minerals, and certain other micronutrients. And you need water and sunlight. That's basically all you need. And oxygen. So if you have these things, you can build a beautiful brain. The it's really important to remember that what food is about. So there are lots and lots of things we eat that don't do a very good job of meeting meeting your needs. Most of what we're eating now is not nourishing. It's not energizing your brain properly, and it's actually damaging the brain. So you're not nourishing, energizing, or protecting your brain. Every food choice you make will either help you with those three things or work against you. And if the information you're given, if you have kind of the run-of-the-mill information, and you're following those guidelines, you are eating a diet. And I know that this isn't anybody's fault. You're just following the headlines and the guidelines. If you eat that way, your brain will not have all the nutrients it needs. You will be damaging your brain from the inside out because your diet will contain too much of the wrong kinds of carbohydrate. Your glucose levels will be running too high. Your insulin levels will be running too high. You'll be taking in things like vegetable oils, things like canola oil, soybean oil, sunflower oil, these oils that we're told are plant-based and cholesterol-free and no saturated fat and heart healthy. Those oils are extraordinarily damaging to the brain and body. They create a lot of oxidative stress and inflammation. These are the forces that are destroying the brain from the inside out, along with glucose spikes. When your glucose spikes too high, then you're going to get also glucose spikes in the brain, not just in the blood. So when you're eating this way, you are depriving your brain of essential nutrients because you're not eating enough of the foods with the right nutrients in them, and you're eating too many of the foods that contain anti-nutrients. You're going to be damaging the brain without realizing it with a lot of refined carbohydrate and vegetable oil, and you're going to be gradually choking off the brain's energy supply. Because if your glucose and insulin levels are running too high too often, which they are for most of us have insulin resistance or prediabetes or diabetes, problems, with our blood sugar and insulin regulation. If your glucose and insulin levels are running too high too often, that is gradually going to cause insulin resistance of the brain, which is going to make it harder and harder for insulin to cross into the brain. And over time, what you're going to have is a brain that's swimming in a sea of glucose and still slowly starving to death because it's not getting enough insulin. Because you need both. You don't just need the glucose, you also need the insulin, or you can't process the glucose properly. So the principles that we've been taught over the years are incorrect. And if you understand where the nutrients are, and your best bet is always the animal foods, and you can include some plants if you know which ones are the safe ones to include. You want an animal-based diet that doesn't spike your blood sugar or insulin levels out of the normal healthy range. So that's a nutritious, whole foods, low carbohydrate diet. That is the diet that is going to bring the most relief to the most people. And it's not just a theory. This is also being shown in the research. We've got a few studies already published now that are very strongly supportive of this way of eating, and all kinds of really exciting research testing this more rigorously in different kinds of mental health conditions. So this is really where I think the future of good mental health treatment is metabolically minded mental health care.
It really is. And you make such brilliant points, and you tell stories in your book and examples of patients that you've had. It's not just your theory of wild, thrown out there in the wilderness. You've seen it in your patients. You tell a story about your personal health and your early days of psychiatry and talking with your colleagues and getting to a point where you're like, we're not making the difference that we thought we were making. And we talk about this with other metabolic health professionals in all a wide range of chronic illnesses, for diabetes and people who are gaining weight and the whole gamut of what metabolic dysfunction and metabolic syndrome can lead to with diabetes and these other cases, that you were, commiserating with your fellow colleagues and saying, we're not making the difference that we thought we were going to make when we went into psychiatry and being able to prescribe medications. When you started delving into some of the nutrition topics that you're mentioning, and you just really taken aback and said, well, now wait a minute. So how could it be that the medications aren't changing the neurotransmitters that like we thought they were? And you really highlight in your book that reducing the inflammation and the oxidative stress and fueling it with something that the body can use, fatty acids, and the fatty acid profile, maybe we should go into, if we have a minute, to talk about why it's different in the vegetable oils and the seed oils that people have been recommending. Because I think there's a lot of people out there that don't understand why we shouldn't eat seed oils and vegetable oils, and it's everywhere. Every time we go out to dinner, it's in everything. And so a lot of us have to cook at home if we're going to make these nutritional changes. We're trying to get the restaurants to change their profiles of what they're cooking in, and they're slowly coming around. The grocery store is having more of these kind of things that we can use. Two things. Let's just go back to the vegetable oil conversation real quickly, and then we'll go back to clinical and the changes that you're seeing in practice.
Yeah, thanks for highlighting the vegetable oils, because vegetable oils don't have any carbohydrate in them. And oftentimes when we're at a low carbohydrate conference or a ketogenic science conference, we haven't historically talked very much about this piece of the puzzle, because fats of any kind don't raise your blood sugar or insulin levels. And so, you could think of them, and I've often described them as, you've got these three macronutrients: fat, protein, and carbohydrate. And if you're thinking about trying to keep your insulin levels in a safer range, then to protect your delicate insulin signaling system and be gentler on your metabolism, then fat is the safest macronutrient you can eat, because fat barely raises insulin at all, right? So, and that's true for the vegetable oils as well. But that doesn't necessarily, just because something doesn't have carbohydrate in it, doesn't necessarily mean it's healthy. So it's great that it doesn't have, any sugar or flour, refined carbohydrates in it. Okay, well, what does it have? So vegetable oil is it's seed, comes from seeds. Soybeans are the seeds of legumes. It comes from canola oil, corn oil, sunflower seeds, safflower seeds, grape seeds. It comes from grains, beans, nuts, and seeds, these oils. So if you can imagine, a bowl of soybeans on your kitchen counter, how in the world would you wrangle the oil out of those seeds and purify it into a clear, odorless, tasteless substance and pour it into a bottle? That's going to take 15 chemical steps and a huge oil refinery. That's what that takes. There's nothing natural about it. And so it involves extraordinarily high pressure, extraordinarily high temperatures, and explosive solvents, and all kinds of other steps. So this is, now it's true that it comes from plants. It's true that it has no cholesterol. It's true that it has no saturated fat. It's true that it has no carbohydrate. That doesn't mean it's good for you. Because what vegetable oil is it's a very unnaturally concentrated source. Most vegetable oils are exceedingly high in an omega-6 fatty acid called linoleic acid. And linoleic acid exists naturally in small amounts in all plant and animal fats. So we're designed to see maybe about 2 to 4% of the fat coming in from whole foods as linoleic acid. That historically, before we were started making vegetable oil in refineries, we were exposed to small amounts of linoleic acid. But now, over the past 100 years, and especially over the past 60 years, since vegetable oils have become part of our everyday life and have been put into every processed and prepared food pretty much on the market, we're eating now 3 to 6 times more linoleic acid than we ever did before. And it's accumulating in our body fat. Our body fat is gradually becoming higher and higher in linoleic acid. The natural fats that we're supposed to be storing in our bodies are gradually being replaced with linoleic acid. And linoleic acid is very fragile. You basically just look at it the wrong way and it falls apart. It's very, very, it's not a stable fat. But the brain absorbs linoleic acid quite well. And when the brain absorbs linoleic acid, what it does with most of it, and the science is still, this is still a very new area of exploration, but what we know already is enough to make me quite concerned, and why I wanted to share these ideas in the book. The brain burns most of the linoleic acid it absorbs for energy. And you might think, oh, that's great, the brain needs energy. Not this kind of energy. The problem with linoleic acid is it's a very long molecule. And so it takes a lot of chopping to get it down to the size that you need to burn it for energy. And every time you're chopping a molecule into pieces, you're getting a lot of oxidative stress. And that's normal. As you break down fuel molecules, you're supposed to get some oxidative stress. It's just part of the price you have to pay for breaking food down into energy. But the brain can't take a lot of oxidative stress. It likes, and therefore it likes to burn very small molecules, glucose and ketones, very small molecules, not long molecules like linoleic acid. The longer the molecule is, the more oxidative stress you get as you're trying to chop it into pieces. And oxidative stress is very damaging for the brain. There's like these little oxygen-free radicals that get released. They're like little bulls in a china shop, and they will randomly damage everything they encounter. Oxidative stress is why we're told all the time, eat more antioxidants. Well, what's causing the oxidative stress in the first place? It's the sugar, which does the very same thing in a lot of ways, the sugar and the vegetable oil. So vegetable oils, as you said, are really hard to avoid. They're in, mayonnaises and salad dressings and soups and sauces, and everybody cooks with it now. Restaurants cook with it because it's cheap. And so it's almost impossible to avoid some amount of vegetable oil in the diet now, unless you cook everything from scratch.
Which we're recommending, which you recommend in the book. Then let's talk about the quiet. So you have the quiet diet that you highlight in the last third of your book. It's the quiet paleo, quiet keto, quiet carnivore. So some of them are lower carb and some of them are ketogenic. And what would the differences be between quieting and a lower carbohydrate diet and quieting with less and less carbohydrates and more ketogenic? And how is that going to help support people with their energy and their protection of their brain?
Yeah, this is, I'm glad you asked about this because it sounds upside down and sounds counterintuitive, but the more sugary your diet is, the harder it can become for your brain to use that sugar for energy. And that's because of insulin resistance, that the higher insulin, the more carbohydrate you eat, the more insulin you're going to need to process that carbohydrate. And high insulin levels will gradually make the brain insulin resistant.
So I almost like to think of it as like the kid who says, "Mom, mom, 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 mom," and she stops listening. So the cells they're not listening, or they're not reacting to the insulin that says, "Hey, let the glucose in." Is that what's happening? It's just not. It's resistant to the message or the knock on the door that says, "Let me in."
Yeah, great analogy. So the brain is a little different than a lot of the other organs. The brain doesn't need insulin to let the glucose in. The brain needs insulin to process the glucose once it comes in. So there are a few exceptions, which we don't need to go into the details, but by and large, you can think of it like this. The blood-brain barrier that's separating the general circulation from the interior of the brain, it's deciding what gets to come in and what it's going to let in and how much. It's letting glucose in, no questions asked. Even in people with very severe insulin resistance, even in people with type 2 diabetes, glucose still still has no trouble getting into the brain. The higher the blood sugar, the higher the brain sugar. They rise and fall together. So the more sugar you eat, the more sugar you'll have in the brain. That's not a good thing. The brain does need some glucose at all times, but it doesn't need much. And if you give it too much glucose, that extra glucose is going to stick to things and caramelize, cause these advanced glycation end products to accumulate in the brain, these sticky clusters. That's going to set off waves of inflammation and oxidative stress, and we're off to the races again. So the glucose, the brain is different from most other organs. The glucose will allow the brain will allow the glucose to come in, across the blood-brain barrier without it doesn't need insulin for that. The insulin doesn't need to knock on the door. The insulin needs to let itself in. So the insulin is knocking on the door, and the blood-brain barrier is going, I've seen an awful lot of you today. I think we're done for the day. So it starts to become resistant. It doesn't allow as much insulin to cross in. There are many, many parts of the body that do this. You get bombarded with insulin all day long, like you're saying. It's like a kid kind of asking mom for help with something, or bugging mom about nagging. Eventually you kind of tune the kid out, right? So, and that's just to protect yourself. So the brain starts to say, you know what, enough insulin. I'm overstimulated, too much insulin, enough already. And so it becomes harder and harder for insulin to cross into the brain. The brain is protecting itself from being overstimulated by insulin. And so insulin has a harder and harder time getting in. So now you've got this brain that's got plenty of glucose, swimming in a sea of glucose, but it's still slowly starving to death because the brain can't process glucose to full capacity without adequate insulin. So strangely enough, when you've got too much glucose in the brain and not enough insulin, those neurotransmitter systems, the chemical imbalances that we talked about, and I explain how this works in the book, but simply by eating too much sugar or simply by eating too much vegetable oil, that's all you need to do to throw your many neurotransmitters out of balance. So that's a really, really important thing to keep in mind, is that you have a lot more control over your brain chemistry than you realize. And the funny thing is, if you want to balance your brain chemistry, one of the most effective ways to do that is to unbalance your diet. I know it sounds counterintuitive, but the less carbohydrate you eat, the more balanced and quiet and calm your brain is going to be, and it's going to perform better for you. So there's this line between low carb and ketogenic. So if you eat less carbohydrate, the first diet in the book, as you were saying, is this quiet paleo plan. It's about 90 grams of carbohydrate per day. That's still a lot less than a typical diet, is more like 300 or more. That's a much quieter, a lower insulin diet, right? Lower glucose, lower insulin, it's much quieter on the brain, body, everything. But for a lot of us that have a lot of metabolic damage now, your glucose and insulin levels are still going to be running too high, and your brain's not going to be getting enough energy. So for a lot of us, we do have to go even lower than 90. We might have to go to 50. We might need to go to 30. We might need to go to 20 grams of carbohydrate per day, or even lower in some cases. The lower you go, the closer you're going to get to ketogenic. And if you can actually shift into ketosis, what that's going to do is, when you get your carbs low enough, and not just your carbs, your insulin. If you change your diet in a way that lowers insulin, not just carbohydrate, but insulin, because protein raises insulin too. If you adjust your diet so that you're turning down your insulin levels, if you turn them down to a certain kind of magical point, it's different for everybody, you're going to turn on fat burning, which you couldn't do when insulin is too high. You're going to turn some of that fat into ketones. Ketones are like little fragments of fat that are ready to burn. They travel to the brain, they cross the blood-brain barrier, and they bridge that energy gap where your brain has lost some of its ability to process glucose. There's not enough insulin in there to process glucose. You've got an energy deficit. Those ketones will bridge that gap. And that's why so many people, when they get not just low carb will bring some people into ketosis and not others, but if you're actually in ketosis, that means your insulin is low, you're burning fat, you're providing ketones, you can see them on your blood meter, and they cross into the brain, and now you're bringing cells back online that might have been kind of just sputtering up until then, really just trying to get by without enough energy. So a lot of people will say, I mean, how many times have you heard this, Pam? A few days into a ketogenic diet, it's like my brain woke up. Like I'm getting things done. I'm smoother. I'm calmer. I'm not hungry. I can concentrate. I'm not as irritable. I can kind of handle things better. I don't kind of get tired in the afternoon and run out of steam. So many things, and mood is so much more even. So that's really the difference between a ketogenic diet and other kinds of diets like Mediterranean and low fat and dietary guidelines and plant-based, all of these other diets, they're not paying enough attention to metabolic health and insulin, glucose, and ketones. And this is just really very fundamental brain metabolism science. And if you're not paying attention to that, you are missing a huge opportunity to not just make people feel a little bit better, but in some cases, complete recovery from serious so-called treatment-resistant mental illnesses.
And you highlight those, and you've worked with people in the field that in some instances did something in their personal life, or had a family member come across this in their personal life where they said, now, wait a minute, they started doing this for epilepsy, or they started doing this for weight loss. And they said, but they noticed real differences in their mental health. There was a story at the very beginning of your book that talks about Carl, and I mean, he had severe mental illness. And then when you talked to him about changing diet for his psychiatric care, that made immense immediate difference. But when the physician who did quite a big study, he decided after he saw his son, his nephew, I think it was, change some of his autistic symptoms and some of his behavioral and communicative skills improve when he was treating his epilepsy with a ketogenic diet. And then he started thinking, well, maybe I could start looking at applying this to my inpatient population. And he did a study, and that was published last year or the year before, with phenomenal results. Like a very high percentage of those patients had a change in their symptoms. Right?
Yes, exactly. So this is the thing that we haven't seen results like this in conventional care before. We don't see results like this with medications. We don't see results like this with other lifestyle changes. This study that I co-authored this study and was published in 2022, so almost 2 years ago now. And it was the work of my friend and colleague, Dr. Albert Denat, who is a wonderful psychiatrist in Toulouse, France, practicing for over 35 years. And he, as you said, inspired by a family member, he decided to try to help his most so-called treatment-resistant patients with severe chronic mental illnesses, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, major depression. These were patients who'd been ill for an average of 10 years already, some as long as 30 years. These were people who were taking an average of 5 psychiatric medications, including in most cases 1 or 2 antipsychotic medications. And they've been in and out of the hospital multiple times, very caring psychiatrist, good supportive psychotherapy, access to all of this great care. They still just weren't getting better. So he invited them as volunteers to come into the hospital and try whole foods, mildly ketogenic diet. It's not, epilepsy level or so-called medical keto with, very high fat to protein ratios. This was a very modestly ketogenic diet in the hospital under his supervision, just to see, could it help? And of course they were excited to try it because nothing else had helped. So they had a very trusting relationship with him, knowing him for so long. They came into the hospital, 31 people, 28 of them were able to stay on the diet for 2 weeks or more, which is what you need to do to start to see benefits. You have to go through a bit of a transition period first. And all 28 who stayed on the diet for 2 weeks or more improved. Every single one of them improved. 43% of them achieved clinical remission from their primary treatment-resistant chronic mental illness, and 64% of them left the hospital on less psychiatric medication, which is the opposite of what we usually see. And the degree of response, the magnitude of how much better they got in terms of their decrease in depression symptoms and psychotic symptoms was 7 to 10 times stronger response than we see in medication studies. This was a really hopeful and exciting finding. And it's helped to lay the groundwork for these more rigorous controlled trials that are now going on around the world. This was not a controlled study. He didn't divide people into two groups and say, half of you are going to get this diet and the other half, we're just going to give you a different diet and compare. And that would be a rigorous randomized controlled trial. He was just trying to help his patients. So imagine not just what's possible for people out there who have given up hope, having a serious mental illness and have tried everything and think that there's nothing else left to try. But imagine if it can help people with serious chronic mental illnesses. Imagine what it can do for people with milder conditions like attention problems, mild mood swings, brain fog, irritability, depression, anxiety. Imagine, this is a really powerful biochemical intervention. It essentially changes the brain's operating system. It shifts your pathways into a quieter, more efficient, more effective mode. It doesn't just tinker with one neurotransmitter here or there the way medication tries to do. It really fundamentally shifts all of those pathways. And if people out there haven't tried it yet, they really owe it to themselves to look into it. I wouldn't, you need to consult with somebody about it, learn more about it, because it is a powerful intervention. It can even be dangerous if you're taking certain medications or have certain health conditions to shift to this diet without supervision. So you do want to consult with somebody first, learn more. That's what the book is there to help you do, if that's one way that you can learn more about it. But it's really, if you've never tried this before, you owe it to yourself to look into it and consider giving it a try, because it's really a very different state of mind.
Again, I was thinking the exact same thing. Imagine if it's able to help people who have actually already done their other side of the trial for 10, 20, 30 years before. That is a little bit of a controlled trial. It's not randomized, but they've done the experiment of 10, 20, 30 years of something not working.
Yes.
They're the same. They have the same brain chemistry. They're the same person. They're not even two different people, which if you're doing a randomized controlled trial, these people are two different people. But in the same person who had these symptoms for such a long time, making that change and then seeing, changing the food and the energy source and the nutrients made this much difference in this severely sick and ill, often debilitated, what's the highest disability in the US and in the world is depression, but given then this higher symptomatic schizophrenia or bipolar, these kind of illnesses are debilitating for people. And then think about how somebody who, like you said, doesn't really even know they have brain fog, that's one category, but somebody who gets depressed and the lights don't feel like they're on and they're just not enjoying life and life just feels like a burden, and they get up in the morning and it's like, I was kind of looking at the topics in Frontiers in Nutrition, where you've published that study and another, and then one other one where Nicole Laurent and Lori Calabresi have published recently, and I've linked it on our Facebook page, that are talking about, and we just did a podcast interview with Erin Bellamy, and she's talking about mild symptoms where the lights just come on and they feel like the day is looking promising and they feel like they're going to be able to get something done, when they might have been just waking up thinking, it's just another day and everything in the world feels terrible and maybe I should just go back to bed. And, just think how much more, what our world would be like if more people felt like this. So thank you for the work you're doing. I would love to go into more about specific neurotransmitters, but maybe I'll just put those in the notes and make a little quote from your book, because we're going to run out of time, but like specifically GABA and glutamate, where, well, let me just say it real quick, because one of the things that stuck to me in the book was turning on the neurotransmitters that bring you out of that kind of funk, and that where you don't have the energy and the lights on, and then diminishing the ones that are kind of making somebody feel anxious, where that's like you said, it's overstimulated. But ketones and the proper fuel for the brain are helping one reduce and one ramp up, so that, like you said, it's balancing. GABA and glutamate, I believe, are the two kind of yin and yangs, and then we'll.
You have done your homework.
Love your book.
Thank you. I love that explanation meant something to you, because it was when I was first studying all of this, I was trying to figure out what's the connection. What is the connection between what we eat and chemical imbalances, and figuring that out, by reading all these different papers and trying to understand the science, and then kind of translating it for people to try to show everybody else, what's going on, so they can picture it and understand it. I love that. So my favorite thing is kind of trying to translate all this really, what seems like very complicated stuff from science papers, for everybody, so everybody can understand it and have this empowering information. And what you're just saying is, so this glutamate GABA, a lot of people have heard of dopamine, they've heard of serotonin. We don't really talk about glutamate and GABA, but they are the master neurotransmitters in the brain. They're really the most powerful ones, and they're the most widespread. And they're really this kind of the primary, basically the gas pedal and the brake pedal of the brain. So glutamate is the gas pedal and GABA is the brake pedal, and the balance between them is essentially what determines your brain's activity level at any given point in time. So sometimes your brain needs to be really stimulated and on, like your child runs into traffic, you better activate those brain cells and do something. You don't want to be calm and relaxed and chill, but there are other times when you're trying to fall asleep, when you want the brake pedal to be the one that's dominating, right? So this yin yang experience. So and the brain has lots of different pathways that help to regulate the balance between these two things. It's always we're evolved to be this system is a very sophisticated, intelligent system. It knows when you're supposed to be on high alert, and it knows when you're supposed to be calming down and resting, right? It's not stupid. But if you feed it the wrong way, it's going to throw all of that off. It's really going to kind of gum up the works. And as you were saying, if you're eating these refined carbohydrates and vegetable oils, you're getting all this inflammation and oxidative stress. The inflammation and oxidative stress throw this system not just a little out of balance, just profoundly out of balance. You've gone from this nice Zen state to what the college students I worked with for so many years would call freaking out. You've got glutamate levels sky high, up to 100 times their usual level. Now you've got your foot on the gas pedal, and the brain is overstimulated. You won't be able to sleep. You may become manic. You may become very irritable, very anxious, thoughts racing, can't calm down, just on high alert. That's useful sometimes, but it should be happening for reasons in your environment that require that high level of attention and alertness. It shouldn't be happening 6 times a day after you eat every meal and snack.
Yeah, when you have a deadline, you want to be able to get your deadline done. You want to stop and be able to rest when you need to rest. You want to save your children. You want to be able to not get eaten by a bear. Whatever that threat is. Georgia, I really thank you for your time, and I would go on and on, but we just can't do that today. We're so looking forward to seeing you at the Symposium Metabolic Health in August, and we hope to see more people who are listening to this join us. It's open to the public. It's technical enough that we're providing CMEs, continuing medical education credits, to healthcare professionals You're going to meet those that are working in the field. We're going to talk about a wide array of metabolic therapies for, like we were talking about, a wide array of chronic illness, but with such a very special focus on helping more people with mental illness that medications just aren't doing enough for. And I'm so grateful. We are so grateful to have you be a part of it, and we're just so looking forward to it. So thank you very much. Sorry, I want to tell people how they can get a hold of you.
No, please take your time. Go ahead.
You were talking about a list of physicians I noticed on your website, diagnosisdiet.com. Those have been, many of them have a symbol or a marking on their profile that Georgia has actually trained them. They've gone through her professional training, and how to contact them if you need support. Society of Metabolic Health Practitioners, who is a co-host of the Symposium Metabolic Health, has also a listing for those who need support in their mental health. Metabolic Health mostly, but you can do refine your search for mental health support, and any other resources besides the beautiful book that you can find in your bookstores or on Amazon or wherever you like to get those books. And I just want to say, if you get the Audible, you get to hear George reading the book in person or in your head. Her voice is narrating the book, and it's just lovely because you have such a clever way and a calming way of teaching people by listening to you. So thank you so much again, and thanks for being part of the upcoming symposium.
That is really kind of you, Pam. And yeah, so I just want to say one more thing about why, about the conference, which is, I go to a lot of conferences, and you might think, well, why do I need to go to conferences? Sometimes people go to conferences in person or online, right?
Yes.
I really strongly encourage people. I think it's great if you can come online. That's fantastic.
And that is available, and the recordings are available if you can't watch it live.
Of course, I understand it's easier, but I really want to encourage people to come in person if you can. It's a completely different experience. It's a 3D experience. It's a hands-on experience. You'll meet other people. You'll make connections that will last for the rest of your life. I know, because this has happened for me. And you can have dinner with all of us, and you can talk with people in between the presentations, and you really get even for those of us who already know a lot about metabolic health. I always learn something new at these conferences, and I always walk away from these conferences feeling energized and more knowledgeable and more motivated about these topics than I was when I arrive. It's a really fulfilling experience to be physically present at these conferences. You can't duplicate that online. And so you're really engaged and immersed in the situation. And so I encourage people, because I know you can stay home and watch these things, but if you can go, you will not regret it. It's just you will leave feeling so much better than when you got there.
You will not regret it. Yes, invest in that 4 days, because it's really hard to explain it, but you've done a really good job. The energy is palpable, the connections that are made. I've seen people collaborate later. If you're a healthcare professional, you'll meet other healthcare professionals, and you'll all kind of commiserate that you weren't helping your patients to begin, at a certain point in your career. And then you got to learning how to do metabolic therapies, and it actually made an enormous difference in your practice. And I can't even put into words how many letters that we've gotten, but I can't imagine what you've gotten from people who had gotten to the point where you had. I'm just not making a difference in my practice like I thought I went into medicine to do. And to be able to learn therapies and practice and see other people who are doing it, that can actually help make a difference in helping your patient population achieve healing and wellness and symptom relief and improve their quality of life. It seems like it's way out here, but it's an everyday occurrence. And so that's why we want to get the information out and raise awareness to more and more people, because it just really is making a difference to people's lives.
Yeah, these conferences, I mean, people put a lot of work. Doug and Pam put a lot of work into arranging an in-person conference because of that extra level of, you get all these extra benefits of being there in person. So I do hope that people will come. I'll be there. I'm going to arrange to have some books there and sign them if people are interested in that, or just come and talk to me.
You will be sold out.
Well, I mean, it's just, it's an opportunity to talk to people and answer questions and have them actually look through it and see, is this book even right for me? You can come and just look through it. But, you can talk to everybody there. So I think it's really important, if you can, to come. Everyday people, non-clinicians, as well as clinicians and researchers. I can't tell you how many times I've heard that going to a conference in person, that it's changed either their own health or their practice or their career trajectory, right? These are the kinds of connections that happen at these conferences. So there's some magic that happens.
There really is. There really is. And you don't have to be a healthcare professional. If you are a patient or just an everyday person who wants to kind of learn more, or you've seen small changes and you want to learn more, or you want to become a coach and help more people, there's people you can connect with, and all of the above. And I really appreciate you pointing that out. Now, Georgia has a code to save 20% off if anybody who's listening on registration and the optional dinner and the optional CME if they use the code Diagnosis Diet to save 20% off. And come and please join us, or if you can't, just watch it online, participate in the chat, get to know people there, and both have the opportunity to get some questions answered. More in person, there's a little bit more time for that, but sometimes I get to read off the ones online. And we will leave it at that. Thank you so much, Georgia.
Thank you very much, Pam. I'm really excited to see you again in a few weeks.
You've been listening to an episode of the Low Carb USA podcast. You can support us on Patreon at patreon.com/lowcarbusa.